Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 25th of October, 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us Northern Exposure from north of the border.
Well, Sajid Javid, the wonderful health secretary, was on BBC Breakfast this morning. He's looking particularly cool there. We've yet to make a final decision on whether to mandatory compel vaccination in the NHS. But if you're asking me, is that something that I'm minded to do? Yes, I am. So he is very much saying that he wants to mandate vaccinations for NHS workers. Why was that? It's not only right for someone working in the NHS, because naturally they're more likely to come into contact with COVID, but also for those they're caring for, those who are vulnerable in the hospital. So it's all getting a bit confusing, Brian. I don't really understand what's going on. Vaccines are the way out of this, but vaccines aren't the way out of this at the same time. So it's all getting very tricky. So let's have a look at this document. This is the latest COVID-19 vaccine surveillance report. This is for week 42. And I just want to highlight this particular table, Table 2, COVID-19 cases by vaccination status between week 38 and week 41, 2021. Well, this report has changed somewhat over the last number of weeks. And now on the right-hand side there, you'll see two columns. One showing rates among persons vaccinated with 2 doses per 100,000 and rates among persons not vaccinated per 100,000. Now, this is for COVID-19 cases. And as Patrick was saying on Friday, of course, the caveat on that is that these numbers are generated through PCR and lateral flow tests and so on. But nonetheless, if we look at those that are under 18, we find that the rate per 100,000 for those that are fully vaccinated is 314. And for those that are not vaccinated, for under 18s, it's 3,013. And that looks like a very bad statistic. But of course, we've got to take into account that schools are requiring huge quantities of testing still, and therefore that will affect those numbers, but also the relatively few number of people that are under 18 that are vaccinated, and therefore that will skew the figures as well. But when we start getting into the areas where vaccination there's been some take up of vaccines, i.e. from 18 to 29, 30 to 39, and so on, we find the picture changing very quickly. And this new table is important because it is per 100,000, so the figures are comparable no matter what the actual vaccination rate is in the country. And so what we find is that once we get to the 30 to 39 age group, actually, in terms of the number of cases, we're doing much better if you're unvaccinated. And particularly well if you're in the 40 to 49 age group, where there's 1,731 cases per 100,000 people if you're vaccinated, and only 772 cases per 100,000 people if you're not vaccinated. That heads up towards those that are over 80, where it is 406 per 100,000 if you're vaccinated, and 304 if you're unvaccinated per 100,000. Now, of course, there are other tables in this document, including deaths, and the death statistics appear to show the opposite trend in the sense that per 100,000 in terms of deaths, it is a worse outcome if you're unvaccinated. But the question there is that, well, there's a whole range of questions which we'll cover more on Wednesday on the death side of things, because that's when the latest ONS data is out. But I wanted to focus on cases in particular, because it's cases that are driving the policy, and it's these case numbers that continue to drive the policy. So I'm not really sure what we can say about that. The question then is Sajid Javid justified in requiring mandatory vaccination for those working in the NHS, when it seems that there's a much higher likelihood that staff working in the NHS would end up becoming a COVID case and therefore taking time off work, for example, and that may increase the pressure on the NHS. I'm not sure. David, I don't know if you saw Friday's programme. We had Tony Blair, a quick clip from Tony Blair, and there just doesn't seem to be any consistency in the argument here from anybody.
No, indeed not. And what's the justification for driving people from their jobs if they won't get vaccinated? It's not that you're protecting other people by being vaccinated, because the Prime Minister's already said that you're not, you can still pass on the disease, you can still catch the disease if you're vaccinated. It's only the very severe end where they're now claiming that there's an advantage to being vaccinated. And that's surely a personal decision. That makes it a personal decision for the individual. I can't see how they have any intellectually coherent position left at all for these mandates and these exclusions of the unvaccinated from the labour force and from economic life.
Just to add a little bit of good news into that analysis, and I don't disagree with what you've said at all, David, but I was told by a person working in the NHS this morning that they are pretty confident that about 120,000 people working for the NHS have said they will not be having a vaccine. And I think the total number of people who work for the NHS is about 500,000, 500,000 people. That's just off the top of my head. So if anybody is saying Brian's not right on that figure for how many are employed by the NHS, please let me know. But a very interesting person talking about the vast number of people inside the NHS who are not going to have a vaccine because they don't believe it's safe. But to come on to your point about Borris, let's just have a little look at Borris talking. This is a very short video clip, which actually came from a Twitter provider that I was given this morning. That's Victory Day, altogether _hope. But a very interesting little clip that I hadn't seen before. Let's hear what Borris has to say.
A lot of protection against serious illness and death, but it doesn't protect you against catching the disease, and it doesn't protect you against passing it on. So now is the time to get your booster. A lot of protection against serious illness.
So there we are. He's very clear in what it doesn't do. I think to answer your main query about the message and why it's incoherent, David, it's simply because they have lied from the start. They have lied about whether or not there was a pandemic. They have lied about all the measures to counter that false pandemic. And now, of course, they're being caught out by their own lies in their own statistics and data. So we can expect the message to become less and less coherent, and we can expect the number of lies to increase as they try and cover their tracks.
And in the meantime, David, here's the Mail with a headline: nerve disorder that affects the feet, hands and limbs are added as a rare side effect of AstraZeneca COVID jab. It took quite a long time for Guillain-Barré syndrome to be added to this list.
It took a very long time because we were reporting on this well over a year ago, wasn't it? Yeah, I think it must have been. Guillain-Barré syndrome has been added. They're talking about 833 cases out of 592 million doses to emphasise how rare it is. I would question that. I think we'll have a look at the statistics on that because we've had quite a lot of reports of this very thing. In fact, gentlemen, the UK column was removed from YouTube for reporting this very effect. We put on a report from a woman whose husband was in ICU because of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which she contracted due to the AstraZeneca jab. And because we put on that truthful and accurate report, YouTube removed our channel. Now that it's on the Mail Online, does that mean they put us back on? I suspect not.
No. So where does that take us?
We're on to a number of things to do with COVID. Let's go to Jacinda Ardern, the Premier of New Zealand, and she's talking and she's been interviewed, and she seems to be unduly relaxed because she says out loud something that I suspect is meant to be secret. Someone asks her a very bold question, but it asks it with such obvious servility. She's kind of disarmed, and in a strange moment, she tells the truth.
So you basically said this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so, yep. Yep.
Can you describe, because you were previously hoping not to have to do that, I guess, when we still looked like we could maintain elimination across the whole country. I guess that has now changed because...
I think it was less because necessarily of the elimination determining that, and more because we, of course, maintained, and actually we have managed very high vaccination rates, generally, without the use of certificates. But actually what it's become clear to me is that they're not just a tool to drive up vaccines, they're a tool for confidence. People who have been vaccinated will want to know that they're around other vaccinated people. They want to know that they're in a safe environment. It is a way that we can give confidence to those who are going back into hospitality or events. And so that is something that I think we should offer to people who have been vaccinated, that confidence that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe and that they can come back out and start enjoying those things safely.
Now, wasn't that a fascinating little clip? So the journalist gives her a question and puts things too strongly, expecting her to roll back, and she just agrees. Yes, that's right. The people who are vaccinated have rights. The people who are unvaccinated don't have those rights. And you can actually hear the journalist trying to roll her back a little bit because he realised she'd gone too far in telling the truth. But it got worse because what she then said, it's about confidence. It's not about health. It's about emotion. It's about emotional state. So what she's essentially saying, I think, is this. We've mobilised all of the weapons that we have in terms of psychology to terrify people. And we've done it for about 2 years now. And the people are very terrified. And they won't stop being terrified just because this vaccine of dubious benefit has been largely taken up by most of the population. They need to be given confidence. We need to do something to disarm the fear that we put into the population, to allow them to go back to the normal lives. Now we want them to do that. So we need to give them confidence. Hence, we must oppress the unvaccinated in order to give the vaccinated confidence. It is a truly astounding statement.
And that brings us then to Scotland, and the headline here in the Courier: COVID restrictions need considered if this is their bad grammar there. If cases rise, warns Scott's top doctor.
Yes, so this is the head of the British Medical Association Scotland, Dr. Lewis Morrison, said, quote, "The case needs to be made. They would genuinely take the pressure off the NHS," talking about more lockdowns. So he then says it would be a mistake to single out COVID-19 as the reason behind the pressure facing the NHS. There's general pressure facing the NHS and staff shortages. So it's not COVID-19, that's not the problem, but lockdown to cure COVID-19, that would solve the problem. You see how incoherent the so-called experts are getting. I would also point out that Dr. Lewis Morrison better watch out because, frankly, he's a bit of a chubster. And he may find that if he continues to support changing a health policy based on controlling people's behaviour, his calorie intake might come in for some attention in years and months to come. He said, at any stage, if cases start to rise again, reintroduction needs to be considered, but it needs to be done in a way that takes everyone with that decision, because I think people have had a very long 20 months. That is also utterly incoherent. In what way can you lock people down and restore the liberty, but take people with the decision? So he's talking about we must lie convincingly. We must deceive the people. We can't just bully them anymore. We have to deceive them. Seems to be what he's saying. But he's already said that it's not COVID that's causing the pressure on the NHS. So the entire position, he's gone on radio and he's just exposed how little he knows about COVID, about the pressures on the NHS, and about what the policy should be, let alone the economic impact, the effect on families, the effect on mental health, and all the other myriad things which he's ignoring as he blithely says, well, we should be thinking about more lockdowns.
And so what's the Labour Party talking about then?
Now, so the Labour Party, this is the opposition, or one of the opposition parties in Scotland. They're saying, well, so there's a wake-up call because there's a spike in patients being exposed to COVID in Scottish hospitals. Transpires, if you want to catch COVID, a hospital's a good place to do it. And and they're saying it's a wake-up call because, you know, they're opposing the SNP. They're being in opposition. Exactly how much of an opposition? Well, they went on Question Time. This is the Labour leader in Scotland, Anas Sarwar. He went on BBC Question Time, and he said, we know who is not vaccinated. We know where they live, and we should be looking at door-to-door vaccinations. So there you go. That's the opposition. The opposition is, yes, I know that you've completely crushed everyone's rights and we've introduced a kind of medical fascism, but we oppose that because it's just not gone far enough. We need to be going into people's homes and vaccinating them. It didn't say forcibly, but there seems to be certainly at least more than a hint of intimidation in here. And yes, the Labour Party's view, if you love liberty, we know where you live.
Excellent. So here's Keir Starmer then. And of course, the Labour Party last week failed to do anything about the renewal of the Coronavirus Act. But today he's very upset about anybody, trying to lobby parents or school teachers. He said it's completely unacceptable for children's teachers or parents to be intimidated and harassed outside their schools. So it's intimidation and harassment, apparently. He went on to say, by protesters peddling misinformation and dangerous lies about the life-saving vaccine program.
Well, I'm wincing here, Mike, because the arrogance of this man, just breathtaking. Of course, he's immensely ignorant as well, but the arrogance of what he's saying. Anybody, we could have a scientific member of the public, they speak out, they're a protester peddling misinformation.
Absolutely, but it gets better. He went on to say the uptake of vaccines among children is far too low and the government's rollout is painfully slow. Everything must be done to get those eligible jabbed as quickly as possible in this public health emergency. So he's still banging the public health emergency drum. And so he says local authorities should have the power to impose public spaces protection orders immediately if agreed by the school, the leader of the council and the local police chief constable. So there we go, David. We're going to get those public spaces protection orders out. We're going to stop people protesting or otherwise lobbying outside the school gates.
So the answer is, how many fascists does it take to screw in a light bulb? Is 3. We need 3 people to take away your rights. We need the local police chief, the headmaster of the school, and the head of the council. That's all. If those 3 agree that you do not have the right of free speech, of public assembly, of making any sort of protest, your rights are gone, presumably forever, or until they change their minds. Right? This is appalling. I mean, I thought at the start of this piece, Mike, were just looking again at the politicians, the Tories' use of irregular nouns. You know, I'm a freedom fighter, you're a guerrilla, he is a terrorist, right? Because we've now got, I am a respected expert, you're peddling misinformation. And the only difference is who agrees with the state. That's the only difference. It's nothing to do with medical qualifications, reason, logic, anything like that. Statistics, perish the thought. It's just who agrees with the government, who agrees with the narrative.
Yeah, and we'll have much more on that in a little bit.
Indeed, but we also need to remember where that narrative for the government comes from, because the government, of course, is not cooking up the narrative themselves. Many people in our chat room are saying at the moment that, of course, with Keir Starmer, you've got to remember his connections to the Trilateral Commission, where we're moving into globalist government. So it's globalist government policy, I think we're seeing, and that's what our MPs are spewing out. They're not thinking for themselves. But let's focus in on the schools, and a big thank you to this little video clip that was sent to us, where a head teacher up in the Manchester area says something very interesting. Listen carefully to this interview by Sky News.
Good morning. Rather chilly Manchester here today, Kay, and the 1,250 pupils have started to arrive here at Ashton-on-Mersey School, and yes, they will be wearing masks. That's a policy within the Trafford area, because this is one of the highest infection rates in the country at the moment. So clearly a real problem for schools to try and keep everyone bio-safe, to try and keep everyone COVID secure, and so on. So masks have been reintroduced here. They've been reintroduced a couple of weeks ago. I can have a chat with the academy principal here, Taryn Kapoor, before. So there are 10 schools within the academy group, aren't there? Just the Trafford ones at the moment are wearing face masks. Just talk us through the situation.
Yeah, two of our schools, secondary schools in Trafford, we moved back to masks last week. I'm really pleased we've done that because it gives the staff and it gives the community a sense of security, I think, because the infection rates are extremely high. It's a very suburban area, this, so it's helped, I think, the situation. I do believe after half term, all schools will be in masks again.
You think that we're going to go back to compulsory masks across the whole country?
It's looking that way. Infection rates across all of our schools are increasing.
So what's the situation here? How many people have you got off at the moment with COVID?
So yesterday we had 30 tests positive, and 14 were sent home with positive lateral flow tests, so there'll be another probably 10 or 15 today. And then we've had the vaccinations, and we've got 14 off with vaccine side effects.
So you do undertake the vaccination programme here. You have the vaccinators in a couple of times a week. What's the take-up been like there?
Yeah, up to now we've had about 420 from 1,250. It's twice a week. I do feel sorry for the health service because with the 5,000 secondary schools, their resources are completely stretched. And they are running out of vaccines in some of the days they're in, so children have to wait for the next session. So some parents are a little bit frustrated, but I'm not blaming the health service because they're doing the best.
Well, you're clearly doing everything that you can here at Ashton-on-Mersey School. So 1,250 pupils, around 45 of them or so off either with confirmed COVID or suspected COVID at the moment. And they are, as you've seen, all wearing face masks when they go into school.
OK, thanks a lot.
So lots of good points there. Sense of security. It's not about reality. It's just what makes people think correctly. That was your point from earlier, David. Biosafe. But what did he say? Well, he said that basically he had a number of children who were off, 14 with adverse reactions from the vaccine. And you'll notice, of course, that the interviewer there did not mention those in his summing up of the children who were not at school. So pumping vaccines into children when we were told at the beginning of the so-called pandemic that children were not at risk, we're pumping in vaccines, and when we get an adverse reaction, we're not mentioning it. But of course, there can't be any adverse reactions, David, because the MHRA, the authority which is monitoring vaccine adverse reactions, even though it's got millions of reports and thousands of deaths recorded, keeps saying there are no adverse reactions. So what can that academy principal, possibly mean that he's got children who've suffered adverse effects?
Adverse effects enough to be off school. So he's caused incapacitation to 14, at least 14 simultaneously, of his pupils. Do you think he's worried by that? Is he concerned?
He should be, because he holds ultimate responsibility for the safety of those children while they're in his school.
Well, he does. Of course, the mindset is, well, it's the NHS, it's nothing to do with us. But that's not the legal position. And how many, okay, he sent 45 home because they've tested positive. But presumably, they didn't have symptoms because otherwise they wouldn't have been at school in the first place. So how many are actually off school because they're ill with COVID, compared to how many are off school because they're ill with the effects of the vaccine? How does that stack up, I wonder?
Well, it's a good question. Of course, as we mentioned many times, people become much more vulnerable to illness in the 2 weeks immediately following vaccination. So the vaccine, if they are ill with COVID or some related illness, is that because they were another type of side effect? That's another good question. But look, let's move on to come back to Sajid Javid this morning, because the question is, are we going back into lockdown now? The Labour Party is very, very keen for us to go back into lockdown, but Javid said, I believe we will have a normal Christmas this year. So everybody will be glad to know that. That almost guarantees that Christmas is cancelled this year, just to translate that for anybody that isn't quite aware. But he also said, don't worry, on Wednesday, he didn't quite say it in these terms, but this is more or less what he said. Don't worry, on Wednesday, Rishi is giving another £5.9 billion to the NHS to deal with the NHS backlog. So nothing to worry about there, but it doesn't they're going to give the money for the backlog. Just run through what they're going to give it for, actually. 2.3 billion will be used to fund a big expansion of diagnostic tests, for example, through more CT, MRI, and ultrasound scans. But that's already been announced, so that's not new money. So that's not really new. Anyway,
But you can't get a test at the moment, Mike. One of the key things is people are saying that they can't get tests.
right.
So,
But they're going to spend 2.3 billion to make sure that you can. So don't worry about that.
okay, that's
Don't
good.
worry. By Christmas, it'll all be sorted. This includes opening more community clinics for scans and tests, is what they said. So 1.5 billion is going to be spent on more beds, equipment, and new surgical hubs. 2.1 billion is going to be spent on improving IT and digital technology within the NHS, for example, faster broadband. So there you go. They're going to spend 5.9 billion, but 2.1 billion of that is going to be for faster broadband. So what would the reason for that be? Would that be to increase the number of 111 consultations, increase the number of remote consultations? I suspect it is, but that's hardly good news in terms of the health service. But it gets even better, doesn't it, David? Because when we head north of the border, of course, we've got the COP26 coming up in a week or two. Well, apparently, in order to facilitate the NHS, to facilitate the COP26, you've basically just got to curl up and die.
Well, it's certainly, if you're looking for a routine appointment in a Glasgow hospital, you may be disappointed. The Herald here reports road closures and hospital appointments cancelled ahead of the conference because they're expecting a lot of congestion. There's, of course, a security zone. Many roads are closed. The middle of Glasgow is going to be horrendous to get round. There's going to be lots of congestion. And to help this and protect the NHS from, I don't know, being annoyed by the traffic, we're cancelling hospital appointments. But don't worry, because Hamza Yusuf, I'm sorry to say this, Health Secretary, has said that, of course, there will be an increase in coronavirus as a result of the COP26 climate change summit descending on Glasgow. So that's not good. So we're bringing these people over to interrupt the flow of treatment to Glaswegians and to give them COVID-19. So there we go.
Excellent. But it's also COP26, that is also having an impact on whether people decide to have children.
Yeah, there was a long piece in the Courier as they talked to a lot of local people, carefully selected local people, about how they view COP26 and the climate emergency. So this is one young lady here. Dundee resident Chuck Riley is so concerned for the future that at the age of just 22, she's decided not to have children. Quote, "I've elected not to have kids because another person who has to worry about their environmental impact, it doesn't make sense." Self-employed Chuck said she's completely set on a decision. "I'm not going to bring someone else into that," she added. So here we see, if you look back at Limits to Growth, the report by the Club of Rome, that really started all of this off. They were looking for an enemy, and the enemy was humanity. You see this being played out now in this young lady's mind. She's so convinced that humanity itself is toxic that she doesn't want to perpetuate the race. We are the enemy. It's anti-human to the core. That's the nature of COP26, and we shouldn't forget it.
Yes. Now, News GB News, sorry, has been running for a little while now. Andrew Neil is gone. I haven't been massively impressed with it in general, David, but one person who has been perhaps better than most has been Neil Olliver. Of course, he's just made a bit of a how do we describe it? He's given a piece to camera. Just lead into this for us.
Yes, so Neil Olliver, who's been a long time defender of rationality and reason and history and analysis and thought, firstly in Scotland, he was head of the National Trust, National Trust of Scotland, much to the anger of the SNP and the supporters, because he supports Great Britain and the Union, and he got a lot of flack for that, and he stood up to that and he did not buckle. And he's now standing up for many other things on GB News. He's standing up for courage. He's standing up for British values, and he's speaking out, and he's doing this in a variety of monologues, which are often excellent. We've got a couple of clips from the most recent one.
I watch world leaders speaking on TV, and I listen to and read the news, and I wonder how stupid they all think we are. Take our own Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He was on Sky News this week and acknowledged that while the vaccine offers a level of protection against illness and death, it doesn't protect you against catching the disease, and it doesn't protect you against passing it on. Those were his exact words. Surely that sentence right there means vaccine passports would be meaningless and pointless. Even if the day comes when every single person in the UK, from newborn babies upwards, has received the vaccines, the virus, assuming our Prime Minister's statement is to be trusted, will continue to be spread among the population. Knowing that someone has been vaccinated will make no difference to whether or not you might catch COVID from them or whether you might pass COVID on. The inference to be drawn from Mr Johnson's words is that the virus will continue to pass between vaccinated and unvaccinated alike. It may reasonably be inferred, therefore, that continued talk of vaccine passports is not about controlling the spread of the virus. Rather, it must be about controlling the movement of people seeking only to go about their law-abiding business. You can't go to a large event in Scotland without a vaccine passport, but 30,000 VIPs and hangers-on at the upcoming climate conference in Glasgow face no such restriction. I ask again, how stupid do they think we are?
And in this next clip, this is towards the end of the same monologue. Neil Olliver starts to look at the total effect on what he's been observing over these past 20 months and how it's changed his view of the people we like to laughingly call our wise overlords.
I no longer trust a great part of the political class, scientists, medical professionals, the judiciary, the media, and others besides. For me now, this is about nothing less than morality, right and wrong. Governments make laws, but just because a government makes something law does not necessarily make that law moral, which is to say right. History is littered with the consequences of immoral laws passed in all sorts of places. I say a government that uses a nudge unit to manipulate via social engineering and psychological techniques the behaviour of the people it has been elected to serve, not to rule, remember, but to serve, is immoral. Millions of people in this country have been hurt too badly by what has unfolded here since the spring of 2020. Millions of people have been driven metaphorically, if not literally, to their knees by lockdown and arrest. The health outcomes of millions, the future prospects of generations have been compromised. Far too many have been compromised beyond repair. We are not stupid. We have, however, been too trusting. More than anything else, this is now about our freedom as human beings. But if we do submit to any more erosion of our civil liberties, then we will have no one to blame but ourselves. This is our country, and the government are our servants, paid for by us. And I tell you now that I won't submit to immoral laws. Submitting to the law means less to me, a lot less, than being guided by my morals, by that which I know to be right and not wrong. Abraham Lincoln said, "To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men." We have not been a nation of cowardly men or women. We are not stupid either. We must not let them treat us as though we are.
And this is the core point, that compliance with these immoral statutes is not, as so many seem to think, virtuous. It's cowardice.
I think that's a fair point.
And a very good statement, a lot in that. But of course, it's not just treating us as children, it's treating us as children and deceiving us wherever possible. Over the weekend, I was having a look for information on the trees being cut down. That's as a result of ash dieback, and that's a whole story in itself. But I stumbled on this very colourful little site. Let's pop it on screen. I'm always fascinated when we see something that looks very cartoon and childish. So what could this possibly be? It says creating a resilient, Net Zero Devon, where people and nature thrive. And there's the very childish image. But let's pop on to a little bit of animation here, which of course is part of the effect to make sure you're paying attention. But this is the real website. Apparently, I discovered to my astonishment and concern that Devon is in the middle of a climate emergency. Can you imagine that, Mike?
No.
Well,
hadn't
apparently we are in the middle of an emergency. And so DCE, there's the little round logo at the top, is Devon Climate Emergency. So let's have a look at how this emergency has been created and run. So if we have a look at this bit, the Devon Climate Emergency Project is raising awareness and encouraging everybody to act. So we're having to tell people that there's a crisis and we're encouraging them to do things. And it's a range of organisations across Devon, and they've declared a climate and ecological emergency and have endorsed the principles of the Devon Climate Declaration. You were aware of that, of course, Mike.
Totally. So they have declared.
Yes, they. Now, this is the interesting point, because who are these people? But on the right, just very quickly, they've got a Devon carbon plan. That's all tied in with Net Zero Task Force. They've got a Devon, Cornwall and Isles of Scilly adaptation plan, and they've got an immediate action plan. So we're in safe hands here. Let's come back to how it's presented to the public. We are children. So here's an interesting little view, and we've got a cargo ship with sails, of course. But notice that in the utopia they're describing, you're going to be eating fish and chips, or you're going to be eating ice creams. But this is their utopia. We haven't got to worry. We're simply the children that are going to be eating the fish and chips and the ice cream. They, whoever they are going to be solving all of these problems about global crisis. So I did a little bit of digging into this, and what do they say about themselves? Well, they're tied in with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've got a Devon Climate Emergency Response Group. They've got a Devon Climate Declaration, a Devon Carbon Plan, and that Net Zero Task Force. So we could go home today, really, Mike, because these people have got it all under control. But at least they say what this really is a collaboration. And now we're getting into the meat of it, because this is a collaboration that has never really been fully declared to the public. Who's involved? Well, unfortunately, quite a lot of people. So here's membership, and what do we find? We find it's all the authorities. So it's Dartmoor National Park, Devon County Council, East Devon District Council, Exeter City Council. This is all the local authorities that have joined up with the Met Office and the University of Exeter and the University of Plymouth. They're working day and night to save us from a climate emergency in Devon. But who set them up in the beginning? Well, if you have a look there, it says that membership, it says there in the red box, membership will be by invitation to strategic and membership organisations. So who invites who? Well, of course, we don't know. So this is effectively an overt secret society where an unknown group of people have decided, if you want to play, you have to apply to come into my club. David, you're smelling a rat, I think.
No, that's Glasgow. This is different. We challenge the end of their declaration. We challenge every organisation, business community, and individual to do the same as they're doing. How can they do that if none of these people or organisations or individuals are allowed to play in their club, in their discussion? That means that they are just dictating to people.
No, David, you got the wrong end of the stick here. This is a completely open, inclusive organisation, and I'll show you just how that works. So this is what they say, that 14,000 randomly selected Devon households are being invited to enter into a civic lottery to determine who represents the county at this summer's Devon Climate Assembly. So this of course, is for the people to decide. So let's see how that works. Well, first of all, you need two organisations to make sure that you can get involved. So you've got the Involve Foundation and the Sortition Foundation, and they've conducted citizens' assemblies on behalf of the UK government and the Scottish Parliament. So this is independent. This is all about the people deciding. And it says that their approach in Devon will ensure that the makeup of the 70-strong Devon Climate Assembly is fair and representative of our population. So they're going to make sure it's fair. It's nothing to do with the people living in Devon. You're not going to be able to say whether it's fair. They're going to say. And there we are. That's the 14,000 randomly selected households. And the households will receive an invitation until the 24th of May. So all this has happened. It's all been put in place. And then it says at the bottom that age, gender, ethnicity, disability, geography, socioeconomic status, and people's own attitude towards climate change are all factors that will be used to produce a representative assembly. So this is a screening process to make sure that you fit the agenda that they want to see put in place. I was astonished as I read through this at how blatant it was that this is control of the population. I don't know whether you've got anything to add at that point, because I was going to have a little look at the people involved, because then it gets very interesting.
Yeah, David, in the past, we have suggested that bringing back grand juries would be a good idea, but there's a fundamental difference between the idea of a grand jury and sortition. And Brian's just hit the nail on the head here. It's about who is sitting on the jury or who is sitting in the Citizens' Assembly. And if you have a screening process where an individual or a group of individuals that already have a predisposed agenda or an ideology that are screening who sits on the Citizens' Assembly, that's not equivalent to a grand jury.
Oh, quite the reverse. I mean, and also grand juries engage in investigation. Grand juries follow their instincts and dig and ask questions. There's no sign that there will be any questions allowed here. And they're saying that they're going to have a representative of the population as a whole in terms of their view of climate change. Right? But they know that this is done against a wall-to-wall, intentional propaganda campaign by the government, by the state, by organisations like the BBC, with an intentional decision, certainly by the BBC because they've been explicit about it, to exclude any contrary view from the public discourse. So having lied consistently to the public for now, 30 years, we're pretty sure that we can go and get a representative example of the public, and we'll only have a few awkward people who have learned to think for themselves and maybe done a little research, who might be saying something against the narrative, but we'll be able to suppress them with sheer numbers.
And Brian, if you think back to the Occupy movement in St. Paul's, if you remember, they attempted to run a similar type of thing. But there was all kinds of shenanigans going on, including the use of Delphi technique to try and get the right answer in those circumstances.
Out of the people,
yes.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look at who is looking after us. So we bring this one up on the screen. So this is some of the people. It says, we believe that people should be at the heart of decision making. Now, the highlight round people there is on the website. That's not something UK Column has done. So what sort of people are involved with Involve? Well, we've got Claire Ainsley. She became a trustee in 2019. Until 2020, she was working with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. If you don't know what that is, go and research it, because you think they have fingers in every single piece of the change pie in society. But in April 2020, she was appointed Director of Policy to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer. So now we discover that we haven't got an independent group of people. What we've got is a closed loop with government, but putting themselves forward as if they're representing ordinary people. Before joining Joseph Rowntree, she was in public affairs and communication. And in May 2018, she authored The New Working Class, How to Win Hearts and Minds. Is Claire working class? Well, she may be, but somehow I doubt it. We'll find out in due course. We've got this one, Dame Julie Mellor. Now, she's chair of Demos and the Young Foundation, two highly profitable organisations who are working.
Highly political organisations?
Yes, a lot of money coming into them is really what I'm trying to say. They're political and they're extremely well funded. And what are they doing? They're all about changing society. But also she's involved with Parliament, or from that time, chair of the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. So these are not independent people. She's worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers. She's been there at the Department of Business. So these are quasi political people who are saying they're working for ordinary people. Hannah White, what's she been doing? Deputy Director of the Institute for Government. So this brings us straight back into the political arena. Are they independent? Well, I wouldn't say so. If you look at the end of her CV here, it's boasting about how she's been working in Westminster. She's dealt with a lot of media, The World at One, Newsnight, Victoria, Derbyshire, Channel 4 News, Sky News. Frequent contributor to the Institute's comment pages and writes for a range of media, including The Guardian, The Times, The Telegraph, and Civil Service World. So this is not an independent person for the ordinary man and woman in the street. Cathy Jones, well, it gets better, because now we find a person who's not only doing this change agenda in UK, but she's also tied in with the same work in Australia. So this can't be an independent group of people. There's something else at work. Sharon Squires, director of her own consultancy, Sharon Squires Consultancy, extensive track record of working with ministers, MPs, and political leaders at the national, regional, and local level. David, I'm watching your face on the screen. I'm able to do that. Viewers, of course, are not at the moment, but this is not an independent organisation. This is an organisation that clearly has a very strong political undertone.
Yes, and it's assembled from people who are on salary, on payroll. They have a blog. There's only one article in the blog, written by Darren Phillips. I was just having a wee look to see who she is. And she might actually be very well qualified for the effects of green policy in Devon, because she works for the Government Insolvency Service, which claims to be delivering economic confidence. So there you go.
And as being pointed out to us from the chat box again today, of course, this is not limited to Devon. This sort of thing is replicated across all the other counties. And ultimately, where's it come from? Well, this is UN Sustainable Development Policy. But if we look at who Involved works with, we find some very interesting people, because they're with the NHS, they're with Carnegie UK, they're working with the Centre for the Study of Democracy, the Home Office, the European Union, Leaders Unlocked. This is not an independent organisation. Nesta, a very big one, and in the middle there we've got Open Society. So this is Soros and his billions of dollars for social change. The Wellcome Foundation at the bottom. The one thing I'll give this organisation credit for is that when you go looking for who's funding them, we can actually see quite a lot of detail on the screen. So Joseph Rowntree, but Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, a lot of government funding, Scottish government funding, Home Office funding, many of these foundations and charities that we don't really know what they do. So if you really want to understand who is actually dealing with this lot, have a look at the funding. And very quickly, the other organisation that was mentioned, and you picked up on, Mike, is Sortition. Let's do democracy differently. Well, who are they to suggest this? Well, if we just look at what they're talking about, if we're to believe this text, a group of friends came together, they met in a pub, and I think they met in a restaurant later on, an Indian restaurant, and they decided they were going to get together to change democracy. But then things got very good for them, and they got government contracts and government contracts overseas, and they're expanding to change democracy. These are the faces. And this is the man who appears to be the co-founder, co-director. He's was a taxi driver, software engineer, social justice activist, mathematics tutor, primary carer of 4 boys, and he's got a PhD in astrophysics, and he's writing books about changing democracy. And now in the background, he's helping to choose people who are going to have a voice or not in the climate emergency in Devon. So a little overview there of the sort of way, the devious way which government is now conducted. If you're not living in Devon, have a look at your county, and I'm sure you will find exactly the same system at work.
Okay, if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there. Also do share material on the various platforms, including brand YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. Excuse me. I think a massive thank you once again to everybody who's managed to pick up a UK Column hoodie. The next batch is in and they are being distributed as we speak, but please be patient because we've got.
They're worth the wait.
Yes.
They're worth the wait is the answer. And a big thank you to people who were pointing at the fact that after going quiet for many months, Bill Gates is now back on the scene with Boris Johnson discussing UK's future. Of course, Bill Gates is unelected. He has no status in the country, but he's allowed to sit in these meetings. But the other bit that went with this was this rather strange expression, sacrifice the goats. Now, what are we talking about? Thank you very much to the people who pointed us at the little bit of film clip that revealed something very strange going on when Borris was next to Billy Goats himself.
And look at what the UK has done with coal-fired power stations. It's a big problem around the world. I'm massively sympathetic to countries that are still relying on coal, but there are alternatives. You know, wind is not a commodity that is restricted to the UK. There are plenty of. I know it hasn't been a particularly windy year, but we must propitiate Aeolus, the god of winds, and sacrifice a goat or something and get it. But lots of goats in a humane way, obviously.
But Bill, thinking about the IEA report, you were nodding your head there. You've already outlined the four.
Well, of course, everybody is laughing and smirking, but could the goats, of course, be the elderly people who've clearly been sacrificed in a disastrous response to the claimed pandemic for COVID-19? What is Borris talking about? And if you watch that video again, you will see how at one stage Bill Gates is squirming in his chair as Borris is talking. So what is in Boris Johnson's head? Is this man material to be the Prime Minister of UK? I personally don't think so, but he's happy to be talking about sacrificing animals to help promote his agenda. It's an interesting little video clip.
Okay, let's have a look at this gent. This is Neil Bush. He's the UK's representative to the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He was giving a speech a couple of days ago to congratulate Dmitry Muratov for co-receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. This was apparently for efforts to safeguard freedom of expression in Russia. So he got it. So Neil Bush thought this was a great thing. So I just wanted to highlight one line from the speech because it said, "We reiterate our concern about Russia's laws on so-called foreign agents, undesirable organizations, and extremism." So keep those three terms in mind: foreign agents, undesirable organizations, and extremism, because I want to just take you through a little story and remind you how far we have come towards dictatorship in the UK and how hypocritical, utterly hypocritical, this sentence from Neil Bush is. So let's start off with the Covert Human Intelligence Criminal Conduct Act, no longer a bill, it's an act. Of course, it was passed last year. And this gives permission for a whole swathe of UK government agencies and others to commit criminal conduct, criminal acts in order to gather intelligence for the intelligence agencies and the UK government. But let's move on to this one, Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. This is currently going through Parliament at the moment. And of course, this is all about preventing undesirable organizations from doing what they want to do and preventing anybody from speaking out and so on. So that is currently in the House of Lords. Here it is. Lords continues detailed check of Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. So that went to committee stage. The day one of that was on Wednesday last week. And there were a number of proposed changes in this and amendments that the House of Lords have put into this bill. But it's really pretty fundamentally not changing anything. So, for example, members speaking on day one made these changes. They discussed changes on a range of subjects, including the mental health of police workforce, the standards by which police driving is to be judged, and backing criminal exploitation of children. That's really all this press release said, so not very much to see there. But here's an example. An amendment which is intended to probe the meaning of unease in the context of protests. And there are quite a number of similar amendments where there are terms in the bill which remain utterly undefined. So in this case, it was unease, but there are other terms as well. And this goes for the next piece of legislation we're going to mention in a second. Another amendment here which would introduce an express statutory right to protest. So they want to make it as an express statutory right to protest. But this is a right that we already have, but they want to put it into statute. Why would they want to do that? Because, of course, they want to limit it. So even the House of Lords here saying, imposing both negative and positive obligations on public authorities while recognizing that the right of protest may need to be limited to protect the other legitimate public interests. So it's about taking a right, which is unlimited, and placing limitations on it. That is what statutory, creating the statutory legislation is. So let's have a look at Lord Paddock here, because he and a number of other lords have written to the Home Secretary to express what they describe as concerns about some of the proposals in the police crime bill. So they say, as experts on police use of force, racial profiling, stop and search, we believe that this bill has dangerous implications for the fight against serious violence, an issue that demands police work in service to, not against, the communities facing its harms. The duty to share intelligence and data may actually exacerbate people's experiences of alienation, exclusion, isolation, some of the root causes of serious violence. And of course, that, some may argue, is part of the intention of the bill, to actually increase tension, but that may be too conspiratorial for some. But let's have a look at this. We've got two pieces of codes of practice that have come out this week. Extraction of information from electronic devices. Well, this first one is about, for example, if your electronic device was owned by, you were the last owner of it before you passed away, then there's no need for any kind of judicial process in order to get rights to the data that's on that phone. Or if you as an individual were to give permission for the police to get access to the phone, this does not cover the other things. Doesn't contain guidance about, for example, extraction of information from a device obtained using coercive or compulsory powers, such as a search warrant, production order, or statutory notice. It doesn't include, it's not covering things like covert extraction of information from a device, for example, if it's necessary as part of an investigation to obtain evidence from a device without a user's knowledge. So there's an implicit acknowledgement here that that sort of thing is going on, but it's not covered by this particular code of practice. And another one that was issued this week, statutory guidance for police on unauthorized encampments. And of course, this is all about limiting or removing, for example, the anti-fracking campaign that took place a number of years ago, and making sure that people can't do the same thing again. So here are the two that we've mentioned so far: Covert Human Intelligence, Criminal Conduct Act, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. The next one, of course, is the Online Safety Bill. We've been talking about that one as well. Facebook, Twitter, Google, and TikTok are all giving evidence to the Draft Online Safety Bill Committee, which is taking place on Thursday this week, I believe, or Wednesday and Thursday this week. Thursday. And so we see with this, as we've seen from recent evidence sessions, is really hitting all the key points that is in the draft legislation already. So this is a shoe-in, really. And then we've got this from Nadine Dorries, who's, of course, the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport at the moment. Someone said they wanted to see me trapped in a burning car and watch flames melt my flesh. Nadine Dorries reveals the online abuse she has received as she promises tougher laws against web trolls. So she's saying that the question of anonymity has dominated the conversation about online abuse over the past week. Rest assured, this bill will end anonymous abuse, because it will end abuse full stop. If it's racist, if it's misogynistic, if it's anti-Semitic, if it's any kind of toxic content that breaks a social media company's terms and conditions, whether hiding behind a fake name or not, it will have to be removed. The police already have the powers, but social media companies need to hand over the data much more quickly and rapidly, remove content themselves. Finally, this bill will force platforms to stop amplifying hateful content via their algorithms. And again, hateful content is not defined in the broader sense. And here's the bottom line, she says, if social media companies fail in any of these duties, they will face a financial hammer blow. Ofcom will be able to fine them up to 10% of their annual global turnover. Well, good luck with that. So then where does that take us? So online safety bill, the final one that I want to remind everybody about is the Counter State Threats Bill. So here is the legislation to counter state threats, hostile activity. This was the consultation. And this was all about modernizing existing counter-espionage laws to reflect the modern threat, the modern legislative standards, create new offences tools and powers to detect, deter and disrupt hostile activity in and targeted at the UK, and improve our ability to protect official data and ensure that the associated offences reflect the greater ease at which significant harm can be done. So this is going to bring in reform of various official secrets acts, but it's also going to create a foreign influence registration scheme. And so I've just got to say, and this is Priti Patel, it's because this is going to empower the whole national security community to counter the insidious threat we face today.
This is fusion, isn't it?
It's absolutely fusion. But for Neil Bush to stand up and criticize Russia for, being concerned about certain groups, about expelling certain groups in some cases that are operating from abroad, and then to argue that, argue the position that he was arguing is untenable. And David, the key point here is that with respect to these, particularly the changes to the Official Secrets Act, this is going to have a chilling effect on journalism and on whistleblowers, because anybody that is publishing data that's been received from whistleblowers or who's refusing to, for example, to admit to the authorities who the whistleblower is, are going to find themselves in significant difficulty. And so we've got 4 pieces of legislation here, which are all enabling acts. They're all enabling acts. And if you add the Coronavirus Act onto that as well, 5 pieces of legislation in total, which in total, it creates a massive dictatorship here.
Yes, and you're quite right to highlight the issue of definition, right? Because we found this in Scotland. It's always a little bit in advance of what they do in the UK. It's a testing ground. Legislation no longer makes any coherent sense because nothing's defined, or at least you don't find out what the definition is until later. The definition, for practical purposes, comes with the policy and the training given to the people who are administering the act, which you don't find out about when it's going through Parliament. So it doesn't get any scrutiny. And of course, it's easily changed downstream. Aidan O'Neill, when he was fighting the named person fight at the Supreme Court, used to complain that named person was like trying to nail fog to the wall, because to argue against it, you first had to define what it was. And it was everything and nothing. There was no clarity of definition. And of course, this tendency to look at things like, this person wanted to see me burn, my flesh melt in a burning car, right? When questioned on this poorly defined or ill-defined concepts that have been introduced into law, what the state will do is it'll look at a very extreme example that everyone will agree on. Here's some child being killed, or here's a politician being tortured, or a human being being tortured. And we're all against that, aren't we? Go, yes. But that's, of course, not the issue. The issue is at the margin. Where does the dividing line come? What stops being free speech and journalism and what starts being criminal? How has that dividing line been moved? Maybe just a little just now. But the reason that there is the words are not clear is that they are providing smoke. And just like an infantry attack, smoke means that they're concealing movement. What they're doing is they're shifting definitions, they're shifting your rights, and they're concealing it by smoke in their words where nothing is clear.
And Brian, it seems to me that the key point we've got here is that only one of those pieces of legislation is already an act. The rest are bills. There's still time to stop it, but that's going to require public engagement.
And people have got to understand what's coming, and it's seeing these little pieces of the jigsaw coming in. You've done a really good job there, Mike, of showing when the little pieces come together, the jigsaw is something very nasty. People have got to warn other people, speak about it. And as we are always saying, those lazy, ignorant, arrogant MPs, they need to be brought back into the fold and educated, because they are going to suffer if this dictatorship is allowed to fully establish itself. They're not going to be above it, they are going to be part of it, because they are nobody in the scale of the wider global policy.
Right, let's move on to inflation then. I'm going to start off with this from American Shipper, and it's entitled Update, $26 billion worth of cargo stuck on container ships off California. So what are they saying? They're saying that delayed ocean freight from Asia around the west coast of the United States is playing a significant role in creating inflationary shortages and breakdowns in the American economy. It's worsening. An all-time record of 103 large container ships, which carry most but not all of ocean-going non-bulk cargo, were either at port docks waiting offshore at Los Angeles and Long Beach ports on the 20th of October. So the average time for a container ship to wait offshore before entering port had risen from a week in mid-September to 13 days now. And some ships, which are running by smaller maritime companies, have been waiting up to 6 weeks. So they're saying that in the meantime, other statistics, in fact, this the same magazine saying U.S. industrial production falling by 1.3% in September month to month. So output of manufacturers down by 0.7%, 7.2% drop in production of cars and motor vehicle parts. Utilities output down by 3.6%. Mining output, which includes oil and natural gas, by 2.3%. So we've got falls in, for example, mining output for natural gas. And of course, that's feeding into price rises for natural gas, which is feeding into as an input cost into production, and so on. And so it goes on. And now let's move on to this one then. This is from Enerdata. And this is quite interesting as well, because actually this goes back to September 2020. The Netherlands cuts Groningen gas production for 2020-2021. So that was announced last year. But what's been announced now, more recently, is that the Dutch have now confirmed the plan to end gas production at Groningen next year. And so they're going to cut it by a further 50% straight away. And then shut it down completely. Apparently, the reason they're going to shut it down, Brian, is because of earthquake risk.
Well, that's very interesting, since we've got a lot of problems around the world that I think would take higher priority.
You might think so.
Yeah.
They say the Dutch government saying that the gas taps will only be turned on again if there are very cold winters, but they will not be turned on again for any price fluctuations. So, David, briefly, thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's a lie. Price sorts everything. It's just a matter of scale. We'll come to a lot of this. So it's just worth noting that the mainstream media's view is, it's the ships and falling production and supply shocks. That's what's happening. Nothing else to see here. There's nothing bigger happening here. It's nothing to do with money printing. Move along, please. Let's look at that momentarily in some more detail.
Well, let's look at it now. So the Guardian, how to inflation-proof your finances. That in what's that, 7 words, had me in stitches when I saw it earlier on.
Yes, it's a deeply funny article, and shows exactly the opposite of what they're trying to show. Right. So you've got this odd illustration here of a nice Sikh gentleman in a turban wrestling with an inflationary spike. And then the Guardian's going to tell you how to fix this, because it's going to be inflation proof. You'll have nothing to worry about. So they say, fix your mortgage, right? Okay. How long for, Guardian? How long do you think this is going to last? Oh, it's only transitory. It's only temporary. Don't worry about it. Change what you buy. That meant buy poorer quality goods, because you can't afford proper, fresh fruit and vegetables anymore. You got to buy stuff in tins because you're poor now. That's what they're saying. Trim any regular costs, or do less. do less, invest some of your savings. For those who have savings, for those who are not struggling to make ends meet, and then sort out your savings. If you have £1,000 or more in savings, you could earn 0.6%, £6 a year. Wow, that's really going to sort things. Thanks, Guardian. Ask for a pay rise, they continue. Now, ask for a pay rise is admission that we've changed and that we're now starting to recognise we're in an inflationary environment. So that's them admitting that everything's changed. Index link your pension income. Only a Guardian columnist could come up with that one. And then most critical of all, don't put off big purchases. Anything that you know you want to buy and have the money to pay for, better buy it sooner rather than later. So they're actually saying, see all of that advanced demand that you've got stretching out over the next 18 months. Spend all that now, because that's going to help inflation. That's how to proof yourself against inflation. It's one of the funniest economic articles I've read in a long time. So thank the Guardian for that.
But that takes us on to the lovely European Central Bank.
Well, here's a little data. Let's just remember what the graph looks like. This is from 99 to present day. This is the European Central Bank's balance sheet. This is their money printing, and it's going exponential. Okay, that is not a good graph. That's a graph of hyperinflation.
And that's a graph which is replicated in the Fed and also in the Bank of England.
Yes, all around the world, all major banks are doing this. It's all the same. We only have one answer left, which is to print money and try and buy our way out of trouble. That's it. That's the only answer they've got. It's just a matter of how we're communicating this. Now, this brings us to the Bank of England. Bank of England got a new chief economist replacing Mr. Haldane, and his name is Blue Pill. No, his name is Hugh Pill, and Hugh Pill is warning that we might have 5% inflation. Really. So a quick look at his biography. Hugh Pill is a chief economist. He was previously chief European economist at Goldman Sachs. So you know you can trust him because he worked for Goldman Sachs. Before that, he worked in the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. He served as deputy director and head of its monetary policy stance division. So see all that hyperinflation we just saw from the European Central Bank? He endorsed that. Right? He bought into that, and he's now at the Bank of England. It's all one big club. We're not in it, and they have no ideas whatsoever. So the BBC reports, the dear Mr. Blue Pill is saying inflation is likely to hit 5%, warns Bank of England chief economist. Yeah, I think it's already there, and it's on the way to something much higher, but there we go. He said it follows recent comments from the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey, who said it will have to act on inflation. The UK interest rate has been at a historic low of 0.1% since March 2020. So we don't have interest rates anymore. We just screwed them to the floor, made them zero, and didn't worry about pesky interest rates. And now they're starting to worry maybe that's going to end badly. And the BBC goes on, again repeating this argument that it's all about supply shocks. It's not about money printing. They report some of the world's biggest food producers have also said that they've got increasing prices. Unilever, which makes PG tips, and Dove Skincare said it had lifted prices and expects to continue to lift them into next year. Well, inflation. The Times reported the Unilever said that palm oil, which the company uses in soap and moisturisers, has risen by 82% over 2 years because of a labour shortage in Indonesia. Poor crop production of soybeans in Brazil has also led to higher prices. Kraft Heinz, which makes tomato ketchup and baked beans, has recently warned that people will have to get used to higher food prices. Nestle revealed that they had increased prices, and the maker of Kit Kat, they said that this was due to increased higher energy, increased raw material costs, and transport. So everything's getting more expensive at the one time, but it's all just a coincidence. There's nothing else to see, says the BBC.
So we've got labour shortages everywhere. How can this be when we've got rising populations? What are people doing with their time? Or is it, as a result of government policy that people are sitting idle? Is that the problem?
No, it's inflation. It's the disintegration of the economy under the effects of inflation. So I looked for an Austrian economist's take on this, and I found one written by Alistair MacLeod called An Austrian Take on Inflation, just for a bit of sanity. It was written in November 13. The date didn't actually come up. I had to go and look for it. I think it was 2014. And I want you to remember that, because some of this might sound like he wrote it yesterday, but he didn't. He wrote it in 2014, and it's a little bit prophetic. So he's writing here, we know that today's macroeconomists are very confused about inflation, if only because despite all experience, they think they can print money and increase bank credit with a view to generating price inflation at a controlled 2% rate. So he goes on to say that Mises had a discussion on this and had two phases of inflation, and he, Alistair MacLeod, has introduced a third, an interim phase. So Mises wrote that basically the beginning of the inflow of additional money makes prices of some commodities rise, other prices rise later. Generally, people do not expect prices to rise and even think they might fall. This is the situation it describes today. That was written in 2014. The interim phase, stop me if this gets very familiar. So Alistair MacLeod writes, this is followed by an interim period when price rises become more widespread and people begin to shift their preferences from holding money towards buying goods whose prices they no longer expect to fall. Popular opinion fails to link rising prices to earlier increase in the quantity of money. It is thought that it is thought to be a temporary phenomenon, the result of other factors such as economic recovery and supply bottlenecks. That is absolutely spot on. That was written 7 years ago. And then the final phase is we enter von Mises' second phase, where the population realizes that money is losing purchasing power and they increasingly dump it for goods as rapidly as possible. This is the flight out of money and into goods. This is what The Guardian only today was advocating. This is the Katastrophenhaus or crack-up boom. Once the currency enters this phase, it is doomed. So we're just about there.
But we don't have to worry, David, because we've got central bank digital currencies waiting in the wings. They're scrambling as fast as they possibly can, because, of course, this is the end game. Now, under normal circumstances, people wouldn't accept a central bank digital currency with the issues of control and data gathering and so on that come with that. But perhaps if there was a problem with your own currency and your own currency basically wasn't working anymore, maybe people might accept that.
I would suggest they would, Mike.
Yes. Well, I think we should leave it there.
Well, I would just say to people, it's a good time to be good to your neighbours, because I've got a feeling that in the coming weeks and months, many of us might need help from our neighbours. So if you're thinking, what can I do to improve my situation, have a go at helping other people.
David, we have just one little piece of video to play out with. So maybe you'd like to introduce this.
Yes, against the background where the world is coming to Glasgow for COP26, but it's bringing COVID. And we're shutting down the city and people are not being able to get to hospital. Nicola Sturgeon's had a major crisis to do with astronomically high world record levels of drug deaths in Scotland. And she's responded by appointing a Green politician to the cabinet who has said, there's nothing inherently unsafe about taking drugs. She's lost again at the Supreme Court. She can't build a ferry. She's made Scottish education, which used to be the finest in the world, a laughingstock. And against this, there's a background of completely unreal agitation for a new independence referendum, and Scotland's going to be free. And as soon as we've got the English, the dead weight of the English, will be rich beyond the dreams of avarice. This kind of utterly unreal backdrop from our supporters is going on all the time. And Nicola's looking increasingly morose and sad and depressed as everything she touches goes wrong. And I saw this little video someone had created and put on Twitter, and I thought it summed up her situation, pitiable though it is, extremely well.
Yes, there we go.
Excellent.
Right.
We're going to end there. Thanks for joining us, David. Thank you to all our viewers and listeners. Thank you to everybody who's supporting the UK column. We are very pleased with how things are going at the moment. We are looking at expansion, more on this in due course, but all of this we've only been able to do with your support. So if you're somebody who's watching and not yet a full supporter, please consider subscribing, because we'd like to get bigger and inform more people as to what's really happening in the UK and worldwide.
We'll be on the main live stream with some extra in a few minutes, so stick with us if you're a member, and otherwise we'll be back 1 p.m. as usual on Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.